Hello and welcome. I'm Chris Moyer, Industry Principal for Z-Prime. Today we are going to have a fascinating discussion on essential tools for asset management and decision making in these uncertain times. It clearly is no longer business as usual in the utility sector. For decades, the adoption of asset management by North American utilities was often limited and incomplete. However, the pandemic and economic and operational consequences have made asset management even more essential, with many utilities now realizing that the core principles of asset management are critical to decision-making and planning in these uncertain times. As budgets shrink and work is deferred, understanding asset risk and the full life cycle consequences of decisions is becoming increasingly important. To discuss the importance of asset management, the importance of data, the importance of understanding how to operationally have excellence on the grid, we're joined by two experts in this field. Ricardo da Silva is the VP of Strategic Operations at NYPA. Ricardo, good afternoon to you and welcome.
Good afternoon, Chris. Good afternoon, everyone. My pleasure to be here.
Well, we're so pleased to have you here. And we are also joined by Baudouin Nyans, who is the Chief Marketing Officer for Copperleaf. And Baudouin, welcome. I believe it's still morning for you.
Indeed. Good morning to you all, or good afternoon.
Well, we are so grateful to have both of you here. And as you can see, our lovely photos here. But I'm going to now turn this first question, well, actually, before we dive in, I just want to, again, welcome everyone in our audience and say that if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to enter them into the chat section. We will try to get through as many of those questions as we can over the course of this hour. And of course, if you're having any technical difficulties with the Cisco WebEx program, typically logging off and then logging back in does resolve those. These slides will be made available after the presentation, and we will be sharing the playback of this presentation shortly after its completion, typically within the next 24 hours. So if you want to dive in and rehear something, you'll be able to do that or share that with a colleague. But now I'm going to turn to questions here. And Ricardo, thank you again for joining us. NYPA is the largest state-owned utility, public power utility in the United States. Tell me a little bit about your role and how that supports NYPA's mission.
Sure, glad to, Chris, and hello to everyone again. And absolutely happy to share a little bit about NYPA, my role in particular, and really how asset management fits into what we're doing within our organization at the New York Power Authority, as well as to support the industry and the New York State goals as well. So if we could just go to the next slide, just have a couple of slides to kind of set a little bit of context. And hopefully that just helps the audience here to understand the journey that NYPA has been on these last couple of years. So we are, as Chris, you mentioned, we are the largest state-owned public utility in the U.S. We have a fleet of over 6,000 megawatts of generation across multiple asset classes, but predominantly hydro asset classes, with over 80% of our power being generated from the hydro fleet located in central and upstate New York. In addition to that, we are a significant part of the backbone from a transmission perspective across New York State, over 1,400 circuit miles of transmission from 115 kV all the way up to 765 kV. We also do a number of programs that are focused on our customers and really providing energy services, product services to really facilitate what our customers do and to promote the economy and growth of our customers, as well as overall economic development within New York State via the low-cost power that we're able to provide. So we have a diverse asset base, as I mentioned, across New York State. Digitization is quite a key piece to our journey in asset management, but also process improvements and process integration. And that's really where adopting asset management best practices internally and making sure that there's clear alignment really helps to both energize the organization and make sure that we're focused on the right things to provide that value to our customers. And one of the ways in which we've done that, and we've taken this very seriously, is to secure the ISO 55001 certification last year as the first electric generation transmission electric utility to do so in North America. Next slide, Chris. And we came up, as part of that journey, we came up with a very simple policy statement around what does asset management mean to NYPA. And to us, you'll see it there, but it really comes down to optimizing performance, cost, and risk of the assets so that we can ensure resilience, safety, reliability, and making sure that environmental and regulatory compliance are met. No, that's quite a bit there to absorb, but really it's that optimization and really leveraging data, leveraging tools, leveraging process to make sure that we're able to make smart decisions and the best decisions for our assets. That translates into asset savvy. It's a mantra for us at NYPA that we've come up with, that we promote each time that we can internally. Really part of a very significant large change management effort that we embarked on a couple of years ago, associated with our asset management strategic initiative, our asset management journey. And to us, memorializing and depicting that optimization is asset savvy. Next slide. So asset management, we are building a digital utility of the future. For those of you that have been part of these ongoing webinars, you've heard some examples of projects and programs that we are undertaking. Just on the left-hand side there of the slide, you'll see a picture of our integrated smart operations center, which it really is a holistic view of data coming into this space that really monitors asset health, but it's a very broad and holistic view of asset health monitoring, physical security, cyber security, and other functions such as data management and communications, infrastructure monitoring. And all of that requires technology. It requires data in order for us to monitor asset performance. And there's a reason why we'd like to monitor asset performance, so that we make sure that that data is accessible to us, so that when we're making decisions, we're not making decisions in a silo, in a vacuum, but really we leverage the collaborative nature and the culture of the organization to look at what the data is telling us and making sure that we're making the most informed decision that we can. We put a true focus on continual improvement. We realize that there's an opportunity for improvement. There's room for improvement, and it's become part of our DNA and our culture is to continually improve and really keeping customer value at the focus. Next slide. So as an example of our asset management at NYPA, and pretty much what we have been communicating internally of why asset management is so important. And it's not only technology, it's not only process, it's not only the people, but it's how do we really execute asset management in this very coordinated and integrated fashion under an asset management system. And you'll see that there's quite a bit to it. And I think it's important for us to communicate, to acknowledge just how much goes into, on a daily basis, asset management, and just how many people are involved in asset management, and what asset management truly is. So quite a bit here really to understand, to pick at, and to again make sure that everyone is educated and that they're leveraging the tools, the technology, the data in the very best way that they can, so that again we're optimizing the life cycle of our assets. And with that, Chris, I'll pass it back to you. The next slide is my contact information. If anyone afterwards has a question that they'd like to direct to me after the webinar.
Well, thank you, Ricardo, and really I appreciate that overview, and in particular that previous slide right before your contact information, which I think really shows the human element of asset management, which is so critical. We are going to be talking a lot about the technical requirements of asset management, the analytics, the data that goes into asset management and needs to go into asset management, but this is still very much a human-driven business. And I think that's a really a great place to bring Baudouin into the conversation. And Baudouin, you've been the CMO at Copperleaf for nearly 7 years. Can you tell me about how you and Copperleaf see critical asset management?
Absolutely. Maybe first, for those of you who don't know Copperleaf in a quick nutshell, here's our vision. It's transforming how the world sees value, which ties into one of the words that Ricardo used, which is value. And we'll come back to that, I'm sure, in the discussion, because it's becoming an increasingly hot topic in asset management. It's all about decision analytics at the enterprise level. So typically, we really want to kind of deploy decision making or decision support solutions across utilities in particular at the broadest level across the organization. And we have a global presence, which you can actually see on the next slide. We're privileged to work with some of the world's leading utilities. What I put here is the North American utilities that we work with. As you can see, they span the continent pretty much. Somehow, I don't know why, but NYPA is still not on there. We'll have to discuss that with Ricardo after this webinar. But you can see also that the volume of assets that are managed through our systems from a decision-making point of view is growing quite dramatically. We're over the trillion now, so that's quite nice. And to your question of critical asset management, it's a bit of a moving target, actually. If you had asked me this question 10 years ago, at that point, the primary concern that we were dealing with at our clients was addressing the long term. So in other words, when you think of an asset, typically an asset has a life of 50, 60, 70 years. And the question was really, how do I make sure that when those assets come to end of life, I'm ready, capital-wise, resource-wise, to actually replace or refurbish those assets? And I think there was a big question mark in a lot of utilities as to when will this happen, how hard will it hit me, and what should I do in preparation thereof? So it was essentially a matter of building a long-term capital plan and doing that bottom up. So in other words, using the information that Ricardo was mentioning about assets, asset condition information, etc., looking into the degradation of the asset, and from there kind of bottom up build a plan. And that was something which often regulators were requiring, of course. So that was the first critical question that came our way. And of course, it's a big question because it's literally the billion-dollar question for many utilities. But at the same time, it's a bit of a specialist exercise, right? I mean, there's only so many people in a utility that care about the very, very long term. Most people are obsessed about what's happening right now or within a few months or the year to come. And that's what we discovered a few years after we started doing these long-term capital plans is you could build a beautiful plan, but in many organizations, there was actually no ability to execute those plans. Because, of course, when you come closer to the plan, so let's say if the plan now becomes something that you have to execute next year, typically you're starting to put in more constraints. You're starting to really become much more granular as to costs, as to the resources that you will need, outages that you might need to take, seasonalities, etc. So it becomes a more complex problem just from a planning point of view as you become more granular. And we discovered that there, through the internal constraints and also through the fact that, of course, you're starting to bring in your stakeholders, as Ricardo mentioned, so you're trying to please everybody in a way, that essentially makes the problem extremely hard. It effectively becomes a multi-criteria decision analysis problem. And to come up with an optimal answer to that was actually extremely hard, and many utilities were struggling with that. So that became the critical path for us, and we spent a lot of time fixing that, or helping in contributing to that particular problem. And then very recently, the third leg, and if you go to the next slide, we'll see that on the next slide, the third leg fell in place. So we started off by doing predicting the long term, then we kind of started working on optimizing the midterm, next year's plan, effectively, if you wish, and now we're into manage. And managing is really about how do I execute on whatever I've decided. And in a steady state, that was reasonably easy to do, but the steady state, of course, has disappeared over the last few months. And now every day is a new day, which also means that you have to revisit your plans at high frequency. And that makes maintaining or managing the portfolios that you've put in place or decisions that you've made extremely challenging. And that's really what we're focusing on right now. And under all three of those elements, or these elements of the triangle there, are the same principles, the principles ISO 55000, which again Ricardo mentioned, which is largely about value-based and risk-informed decision-making, and importantly in what we call a collaborative and controlled environment, which is of course what you put in place through our systems.
Well, thank you, Woudwyn. And as I mentioned, we will be able to share some of these slides after the fact, after the session is over. But now I want to turn into this idea of transformation that both of you brought up. Ricardo, NYPA has boldly stated that you are working to become the first fully digital utility. How has asset management changed as part of this goal?
Yeah, Chris. Well, the two go hand in hand. It's digitization with a purpose in mind. Really, what are the problems that we're looking to solve? What are the goals and objectives that we're looking to meet? What are the performance requirements that we're looking at achieving? And really, asset management is that foundation that solidifies that. So in terms of understanding what our stakeholder requirements are, in terms of really merging processes and doing so in a coordinated fashion so that we're really looking at asset management and asset performance. So when NYPA set out a few years ago as part of our Vision 2020, and granted, we are wrapping up the year 2020, but about 5 years or so ago, we set out on this journey to implement our Vision 2020. And part of that was 2 sets of strategic initiatives that formed the basis of infrastructure modernization for us. One of them was smart generation and transmission. What are the technologies? What are the data analytics capabilities? What are the skill sets that we need to embed in the organization? So truly the digital aspect of it. But coupled with smart generation and transmission is also asset management as a strategic initiative. Because we wanted to make sure that, again, it wasn't technology that we were going to implement and put on a shelf. We wanted really to extract the most value out of that technology and that data, because at the end of the day, we want to, as I mentioned, make better decisions, but in order to do so, we need to empower the workforce. We need to empower the organization, empower individuals with the tools that they need out in the field to get the information that they need at the right time in order for them to make the most effective decisions. So for us, these last few years have been very much so about keeping both of those things in mind. And as we've progressed both strategic initiatives forward, we're in the year 2020 where we've made some great progress with respect to digitization, but it's really keeping that aspect of in mind, asset management, and really what's the purpose that we're looking at filling. Now, as we look beyond 2020, NYPA's working on our next iteration, which is going to be Vision 2030, and that will soon be published, publicly made available. But it's really having this foundation, further looking at improving the foundation and leveraging what we've already put in place, and continually improving and looking at opportunities to digitize further, look at new emerging technologies, and looking at ways to operationalize them, and scaling up from there. But that also involves making sure that our people, right? It comes down to people, as you highlighted, Chris, making sure that our people are part of the solutioning, that they understand their role in the solution, and that they also understand, know, are trained, have the appropriate skill sets in order to use the tools that are being made available to them. So that's going to be a continued focus on us going forward.
Thank you. Baldwin, how quickly are utilities adopting digital tools to support their asset management operations? And why is this transformation so critical for the industry?
Yeah, I mean, it all depends on how you define the word quickly, I guess. But still, it's definitely accelerating. There's no argument about that. And part of it, I think, comes from some of the points that Ricardo was making, which is really an increase in the awareness of the need for good asset management. And of course, ISO 55000, of course, is a perfect example of that. And by the way, over half of the organizations certified to ISO 55000 are utilities. So utilities are definitely in the lead in that regard. NYPA is, of course, a perfect example. This really, when you think of it, good asset management is largely driven by rigorous and documented processes that are then deployed, of course. And deploying and supporting and enforcing those processes is often something that digital technology will allow you to do, much better than if it were just paper and people that have to comply to paper. When the system is there to kind of reinforce behaviors and to force you to do things in a particular way, that helps a lot. So there's that. The second enabler is obviously data. We talked about data. You can see utilities becoming much more data rich over the years. And that, of course, feeds digital tools and models in particular. And the ability to model things, assets or otherwise, are, of course, something which will accelerate the adoption of digital technology. In particular, it allows you to explore multiple scenarios at a high pace and relatively elegantly. And that is key because when you think of it, the future is uncertain. So when we think of our assets, like how will they behave into the future? Well, you have to model that. And, degradation models, et cetera, are becoming very common. But equally, costing models as to what is it going to cost me into the future to do things. Benefit models, what will be the benefits that I'll extract from particular assets into the future. So all these models are starting to kind of grow and, of course, have to be fed, and largely by data. So that is something which is accelerating for sure. And then so that's the carrot side, if you wish. The stick side, of course, is the regulator. And what you see there is that many regulators are effectively starting to tighten the bolts. They're becoming more and more inquisitive as to exactly how utilities are being run, what's the level of rigor and decision-making that is being applied. And in particular, and the trend is coming in from Europe there, we're seeing a shift to performance-based regulation. And the moment that you go to performance-based regulation, that complicates things immensely because now you have to start tracking the outcomes of what you do as far as the benefits that you're actually delivering, that you promised up front and that you're now delivering. And that, of course, means that you have to monitor not only your assets, but also what your assets are doing to the organization or to the stakeholders. And that is extremely difficult to do by hand. Like that's really where digital systems that help you monitor not only what happens, but also what should have happened, and how do you explain the difference between the two, etc. That's something which is extremely key and extremely difficult to do without digital tools. So that's another avenue that we see, or another reason that we see a big adoption of digital technology is, in effect, the fact that the regulator is becoming more sophisticated, and in turn is forcing utilities to become more sophisticated.
Well, Bodwin, I'm so glad that you mentioned that you qualified the speed with which the industry is moving. I think that's very appropriate. Certainly, the last decade saw a tremendous increase over previous decades in terms of the acceleration and towards this asset management, towards a dependency on analytics, and that would certainly bode well for the industry if that acceleration only increased in the 2020s. But we'll get to that topic next. I kind of want to get Ricardo's reaction to that, and how critical is asset monitoring and analytics for NYPA in achieving your operational goals?
Well, for NYPA, that's critical. I mean, our asset base is generation and transmission asset base, and our operations really revolves around looking at ways to optimize how those assets are operated, maintained, so that we can continue to provide the reliable service that we do across the state to our customers. So to Bodwin's point around being outcome-oriented and performance-oriented, that's where asset monitoring comes into play for us. So we've been devoting quite a bit of time and resources to that, deploying sensors to make sure that we are looking at the appropriate failure modes on equipment. Taking a look at data and data points that were previously available to us via control systems, but were being used for process controls, not necessarily for asset performance monitoring. Putting in place dedicated resources to look at monitoring that asset performance and looking at anomalies around asset performance, and looking at identifying issues before they ever become issues. So really a risk-based approach, right, to assets. So those are all examples of things that we have been doing from an asset performance monitoring perspective, because we want to make sure we're using our resources wisely, right? I mean, it's not, I doubt any organization out there has an unlimited budget available to them, or an unlimited set of human resources and human capital to go along with it. So how do we manage risk, and how do we make sure that those resources are being used wisely? We're using asset monitoring technologies and various data analytics capabilities in order to do that, so that then as we put together our asset management plans, we have a more informed view of where we need to devote those resources. And it's not only about addressing the immediate or the near real-time issues. It's really looking at how can we, to Bodwin's point, how can we predict or really understand what the long-term need of an asset is, so that as we're looking 5 years out, 10 years out, 20 years out, we're able to really develop out these asset management plans, so that we try to have as good of an understanding as we can early, so that we can plan for it and we can prepare for that. So that's equally important. The one other thing that I'll add is the reliance on these technologies. it's a work in progress, right? It's a work in progress, and what I mean by that is it's not always apparent, right? It needs care, it needs custody, it needs nurturing, it needs development, and really having the patience and having the resources to really build that out, and being very agile with respect to how that's done. So being patient, and I think that this is the cultural piece, really being patient that, the answer may not always be apparent, or the data analytics may not always be 100% perfect, but just seeing what's made available, being agile with respect to iterating through it, improving on it, building upon it, and just over time that those capabilities will improve and mature. But it does require both kind of dedication to kind of that care and nurturing of the different tools in order to develop out the analytics, and I think also a certain degree of patience within and understanding within the organization that it is an agile process, and that again, we want to look at ways to extract value as early as we can.
Well, speaking of agile processes, what is evident here on December 8th in 2020 is that this has been a year of real disruption and uncertainty. And I don't think that we need to go into great length about the impact of COVID-19, but we would be remiss if we didn't spend a little bit of time discussing how the pandemic has impacted the utility business, and in particular asset management within the context of that. And so, Baldwin, I want to turn first to you and say, from your broad industry perspective, how has the industry as a whole handled challenges related to COVID-19 and the disruption that has wrought?
Well, I'll tell you, I have been truly amazed, to be honest, by the level of preparedness and resilience that utilities have shown in this year. I've heard over and over, you talk to utility leaders, and a lot of them will just simply tell you, well, we just pulled out the binder, pandemic plan, and we executed. So the mere fact that binder existed and that actually they actually were ready to execute is absolutely remarkable. And it's one of the few industries, I think, that collectively was so well prepared for such a low probability, high consequence event. I don't really know of any other industry that survived so well when you think of it. I'm sure Ricardo has a few stories about what happened in the background, but for the outside world, as a consumer, if you wish, I mean, utilities didn't miss a beat by and large, which is absolutely remarkable. So congratulations for that. Now, one of the key challenges that it has brought on the asset management side, of course, is how will the pandemic affect operations in the long term? And in particular, of course, when you think of it, what has happened is over the last 6-8 months, a lot of maintenance work and certainly a lot of asset replacements have been deferred for whatever reasons. Just, sometimes you literally could not get to the assets or whatever. And of course, financially, challenges have to be met too. And the question, of course, is what are the consequences of these deferrals? And that's, again, one area where digital tools come in handy, because they actually allow you to model into the future, build scenarios into the future. And one of the questions we get all the time is, how much work and investment can we defer without creating some kind of an unsurmountable problem in the future? And that is, of course, I think the problem that we're all kind of getting very, very concerned about is, how much is too much, right? Like, at which point does this become something which we're going to have to pay for in the future in some big way? So we'll see. I mean, it's hard to say. We're still in the middle of it.
Well, that we are. We are still in the middle of it, and there certainly are some wonderful, encouraging signs, but that is not the time for individuals or utilities or any businesses to ease up. There's still a lot of critical work that needs to get done. Ricardo, how has asset management prepared NYPA for the current crisis? And Baldwin, I think, did a wonderful job, laying out that utilities were uniquely prepared for this. But maybe you can help us peek behind the curtains ever so slightly and talk about what actually has transpired thus far.
Yeah, sure. It's definitely been unique, right, for everyone. Definitely unique set of circumstances. But firmly believe that asset management has prepared NYPA even more so beyond the pandemic plans, et cetera, that you referred to. Having that systematic view and process-oriented view and coordinated view of decision making, it makes it just that much easier in the midst of a global pandemic and a global crisis. So we looked to our asset management system, as we started to take certain steps. So going back to early this year, March timeframe really is when things started to, really sort of ramp up in terms of the impacts and the spread rate among the community. And we made certain decisions at that point. One of those decisions was that folks would work remotely, right? Our workforce would work remotely, and that definitely wasn't unique because that applied to everybody. But we were prepared from a tools perspective to really conduct that shift to remote work, and our IT group had done marvelous job really putting in place the infrastructure ahead of time and all the devices ahead of time to make sure that happened very smoothly, I will say. So really we were able to continue our activities working remotely. Another aspect of it was we got to a point where we sequestered personnel. So we sequestered just about 80 or so critical essential staff members across our various operating facilities, operators, security staff, roles along those lines, to make sure that we continue to provide the essential service. So how did we support those teams? And we tried to do as best of a job we could because they were really sacrificing themselves by being sequestered. And our ISOC, our Integrated Smart Operations Center that I referenced earlier, we had to shift to really a distributed fashion with our ISOC as well. So in as much as we're monitoring asset health, we didn't have these individuals in a room together, but they were working from their homes. They had access to all of the various, again, data analytics tools and platforms from their laptops at home, and they were monitoring asset performance so that, again, if there was a circumstance, if there was an issue, they would be able to pick up the phone and interact with the plant staff at that point. So for us, it was a combination, right, of asset management system practices and helping us to pause projects, resume projects, make shifts with project work. We had maintenance activities that we also had to figure out and decide: do we pause them? Do we defer them? When do we resume them? So we look to our asset management again processes and set of decision-making criteria to help us just make that transition that much easier, if you would.
Well, appreciate all your work, and I don't think that this can be said enough. We absolutely, as a society, need to celebrate and thank every healthcare professional, every grocery store worker, every delivery driver that has helped keep society functioning at a reasonable level. But the group that is always left out of that conversation, unfortunately, and shouldn't be, is the utility professional that has kept all of those other industries able to function and allowed many people to work from home and allowed the telecommunications industry to provide us internet that we can do all these fantastic things. So huge, huge thanks to everybody at NYPA and everybody throughout the industry. I want to take one more question to both of you on this topic, and that's in the context of planning related to the global pandemic and how that's impacted decision-making and the planning process going forward. Baldwin, from your perspective, from that broad industry perspective, what are you seeing? How has this pandemic impacted decision-making around asset management going forward?
Yeah. So obviously, in the short term, what you're dealing with is this kind of perfect storm of, lowered revenue and complicated work planning, which makes execution of anything very difficult. But in a way, I think the harder bit will be the long term, as I was mentioning earlier, and that is it's hard to figure out exactly what the future looks like. Of course, we can predict how our assets might behave based on the data that we have, but there's other stuff. Actually, the very reason Ricardo was mentioning, a lot of this stuff is working from home. This is true for many of us, of course. A lot of people are working from home. So power consumption patterns are changing. Is this permanent or is this temporary? Like, in a year's time, will everybody be back in the office or not? I don't know. And there's other long-term effects, which frankly, nobody has a clear view as to how this is going to play out. So in other words, there's much increased uncertainty. We have a very uncertain future, much more so than utilities might have had a year ago. And consequently, the ability and the necessity to explore multiple scenarios as to what the future might look like is becoming increasingly important, which again points to digital tools, of course, that allow you to explore and also adjust your course quickly if need be. The other aspect, of course, is capital spend. If you look at capital spend over the last few months, pretty much every month has been a bad news month where you get a memo from above saying, okay, well, cut another 10%. And with that, of course, the question becomes, okay, well, as I'm doing these repeated cuts, where do I do them in my organization? So revisiting the capital plans and making sure that whatever money is left is really applied to the most critical assets and the most critical work is actually hard, especially if you want to make sure that risk remains at acceptable levels, as Ricardo was mentioning. So knowing your risks, where they are in the asset base, how they evolve over time, and how you actually have to kind of counteract or prevent them is something which is becoming increasingly difficult, but also increasingly urgent. So this agility that Ricardo was mentioning is definitely something which is key. The good news from a selfish point of view is it has accelerated the adoption of our solutions quite dramatically. Actually, this year has been by far our best year, in the sense that I think a lot of utilities all of a sudden woke up and said, okay, we need to accelerate the adoption of these kind of tools to actually put us in a better position to make better decisions now.
Ricardo, what's your experience at the New York Power Authority look like when it comes to how the pandemic has impacted decision-making into the future?
Yeah, no, I think Baldwin put it very well. It's, in as much as we try to predict the future, it's a little bit challenging. And I sort of recall even it was very early this year. Actually, it may have been late last year where we were undergoing some scenario planning. And this was actually one of the scenarios that we had contemplated is this sort of an event similar to this, like a doom and gloom sort of event. Unbeknownst to anybody at the time as we were working through these different workshops, that a couple of months later would actually turn into reality. So what may seem unrealistic today may turn out to be reality quite quickly, and vice versa for that matter. So I think we do need to look to scenario planning and need to remain agile. And I think if we have the systems in place right? This is what I believe, what we believe at NYPA. If we have the systems in place, if we have the tools in place that, regardless of what that event may be, it may be something that we've planned for, or it may be something that is really very remote. I think it gives us, we're going to be better prepared to handle that event and to make decisions surrounding that event. For us at NYPA, with COVID over the last few months, for us it's validated. It's validated that the investments we've made, that we're on the right path, and we need to continue on this journey, on this path, because having access to the digital tools, to the data really that these digital tools is collecting, has been very valuable to us. And really, as we now look towards the future around empowering that the workforce and our digital worker programs, it's how can we have individuals focused on the core functions, maintain focus on the core functions, but we're enabling them with information, right? Turning that data into insights with information that they have available to them. So again, to Bodwin's point, I think the agility, the validation, the acceleration of these programs, that's been something that we've experienced at NYPA.
Thank you both for sharing that experience and having that frank and candid conversation about where we've been related to COVID and where we are going over the next few months and year. So COVID is unquestionably one of the biggest challenges that the utility industry, that any industry is facing, but it is not the only challenge that utilities face in regards to transformation specifically related to asset management. Bodwin, I want to ask you first, and then I'm going to ask Ricardo you the exact same question. What are the biggest challenges to digital transformation of asset management?
Okay. Well, obviously every utility starts from a different point, so the challenges might be slightly different, but there's three that pop up pretty systematically. And then the first one, no surprise, is data. And in particular, of course, the perceived lack of data. So in other words, what we hear a lot is, we can't improve until we have better data. Which fundamentally I tend to disagree with, because yes, data is of course very useful and data can accelerate your transformation, no argument there, but it's by no means necessary. I think a lot of what asset management is about is processes. Those processes can be put in place irrespective of data, or at least as a starting point can be put in place without data, and data can enrich the application of these processes over time. So I think the other aspect of data that you have to be careful with is there is such a thing as too much data, because data are assets in their own right, and consequently there's a cost to that. So in a way, I think for many utilities, starting with relatively imperfect or incomplete data is maybe not a bad thing, because it allows you to figure out which data actually are valuable enough that I should spend more money, more time to actually collect them in a more rational or more systematic way, and therefore maintain them over time too. The other aspect of that, of course, is there is actually, generally speaking, a lot of data in utilities. It's just in people's heads. So, the expert knowledge that is within the utilities is often phenomenal. So a lot of the data collection, in my mind, at least in day one, is about just extracting the knowledge out of the head of the people and use that as a first step towards, kind of automating and putting digital processes in place based on the expert knowledge that's available. And then after that, you can go and decide how much more data you need, and you can use your experts to validate that data. So that's the one challenge is definitely data. The second one is even more comical, if you wish, and that is, what are we trying to achieve? And it sounds like a simple question, and you'd expect any utility to have an immediate answer to that. But actually, if you go around very often what you'll find is within utilities, there is no consensus in a formal way as to what are the objectives of the organization. And consequently, the organization is scattered around and doing different things in different ways. So the necessity to understand exactly, what are the goals? It's the famous alignment of ISO 55000, right? Like, everybody should be aligned. That is absolutely key. And digital tools in that regard are great, because digital tools, of course, will allow you to enforce the party line, if you wish, across the organization. If there's one way of making decisions, if there's one way of writing a business case, if there's one way of measuring something, a digital system will kind of systematically enforce that across the organization. So that continuous reinforcement is key. It also, of course, avoids people gaming the system, which can happen. The third one is what I call legacy digital systems. So, of course, most utilities have literally hundreds of IT systems or IT tools running across the organization, mostly of a transactional nature. And when you think of your ERP system or EAM systems, they're typically very transactional. And what I see often is this hope that somehow these transactional systems will develop wings and become, analysis tools and decision support tools, which is not going to happen. And I think in that regard, the pandemic has had an interesting side effect, that is because of the pressure that is put on the utilities. It has kind of reinforced the point that that is not going to happen. You need specialized tools to help your decision making. Excel might do it for small organizations or for small problems, but at an enterprise level, you typically have to go for very specific solutions, which actually will give you that agility that Ricardo was talking about to react fast to this fast-changing world.
I think you've really encapsulated what so many of those challenges are. Ricardo, is there anything that you want to add or speak to specifically in regards to NYPA before we wrap up with a look at how this is going to take place?
Yeah, I think I'd just compliment what Bodwin mentioned there, and with the more the human element, the leadership commitment. I think really to help with that alignment, that leadership and commitment is very important. Really making sure that within your respective organizations that's very apparent, and that message is very, very clear as far as what the purpose is. That is something that at NYPA we've had tremendous leadership support from our President CEO Gil Quinones every step of the way with this. So important, and really appreciate that. Couple of things are the don't do it alone. Right? Don't do it alone. So, and as much there's a significant human element associated with this, and I think it's human nature that individuals try to do things really themselves, because it almost, I think as humans, we almost feel like it's a sign of weakness if we need to look to someone else, and that's not the case. Really look to someone else, make use of the tools that are available to you, but really collaborate, join together, share ideas, challenge one another. Challenge. I think that's a key word there. Challenge, and I think a healthy amount of challenging back and forth is important to make sure that the best decision is made. And then the third part of it is the cultural or the transformation part of it. It takes focus. The change management aspect of this takes significant focus and effort in order to achieve. It's not something that's done over the course of a week, a month, 6 months. It takes time, and it takes really nurturing and developing that. So putting in place a team that can really focus on embedding those traits and that behavior within the organization as a whole is important.
Well, I'm almost tempted to end it right there, because I think that is all the two of you have put forward a series of lessons that we all should learn, not just for asset management, but in some ways for life too. We've got a couple minutes left, and I want to get I want to ask each of you one more question. So, Baldwin, what planning scenarios should utilities be engaged in right now to navigate the challenges ahead?
Okay. Well, again, your mileage varies, of course, depending on where you start. But if you think of it, like one of the key elements that we're starting to see is a shift towards what I would call enterprise-wide decision making. So the challenge of a utility is, generally speaking, it's an old organization in the sense it's been around forever. And with that, bad habits tend to evolve. And in particular, silos tend to grow. And with that, what you wind up is different practices in decision making and then other areas across the organization. And that creates high variability, of course. And that variability, I think, is something that they can't afford anymore, especially now that things are getting a bit more urgent. So what was tolerable in business as usual is not tolerable anymore right now. So you're starting to see this strong push, which is tied into leadership, of course, as Ricardo was saying, of building bridges between the silos, or breaking down the silos, if you wish, and adopting common practices in asset management and decision making. That, of course, really kind of ties back into, again, systems that you might want to put in place to enforce and kind of push for that alignment. The other aspect that we see, and it's kind of tied into that, is the fact that when we think asset management, generally speaking, we think of productive assets, generation assets, transmission assets. But of course, we also have facilities, we have fleets, we have IT, all these are assets. And what I'm starting to see now is organizations really taking a much broader view of asset management as a discipline, and the systems they're putting in place should manage everything, including these kind of secondary aspects or secondary assets historically. So that's one. The other thing is because of moving away from business as usual, it creates a lot of tension between what traditionally was sustainment or renewal of existing assets and investments which are needed because the world is shifting around. So new sources of generation, grid modernization, etc. There's a clash between the two. It's like how much money goes to maintaining what we have, how much money should we put in, into new initiatives, if you wish, because at the end of the day, the pot is only one. And that really means that risk-based decision-making doesn't cut it. You have to go to value-based decision-making because new projects are value-based as opposed to risk-based, generally speaking. So this whole idea of creating a value framework, which really spells out what we value as an organization and how assets generate value, and then use that value framework as a foundation to make decisions, is something which is absolutely key. And again, it complicates matters from a mathematical point of view, if you wish. So that's where, again, systems like ours tend to kick in. But it's certainly something which is key. And the third one, very quickly, is what Ricardo already mentioned, and that is what if. So the fact that you need to be able to very quickly do what if scenarios. And I hear over and over that it takes forever to build a scenario with spreadsheets. So you need to get off that, and you need to get into systems which allow you to in a very agile and quick way do what if scenarios.
Well, you've just teed me up so perfectly, because that's the question I wanted to end on and end with Ricardo. Why has the ability to quickly model what if scenarios become so crucial for operational planning, Ricardo?
Well, because it's about the future. Really, it's how do we prepare ourselves for that future world? We have some very ambitious goals ahead of us within New York State around what that future grid is going to look like, and how do our legacy assets, our legacy systems, play a role in that future? How do they need to shift and transition? And then as we onboard new assets to support that, how are they going to be operated, maintained, and how is our workforce going to be impacted by all this, and what does that workforce of the future look like? So to us, that scenario planning or that basis really helps us support just how can we do our best today to plan for that for those future outcomes. And it's easier said than done. It is challenging. It is uncomfortable because it is a different way of thinking about a problem per se, but it is an important aspect of making sure that we're conducting proper asset management for that future roadmap.
Well, and that is now the perfect way to end our conversation today on asset management and the importance of asset management in navigating trying times like COVID-19, but navigating future trying times that the utility industry will be going through as well when it comes to integrating distributed energy resources, to integrating renewables more thoroughly. Baldwin mentioned performance-based regulations. All of these challenges are still to come, and asset management is critical and at the heart of navigating it successfully. So I want to thank both Ricardo and Baldwin for their excellent comments today. Really fascinating stuff. Thank you both, gentlemen.
A pleasure.
Pleasure, thank you.
And a big thank you to both the New York Power Authority and Copperleaf for participating and being critical to the production of this wonderful webinar and this great conversation. I also want to take a moment and thank all of you for tuning in today. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule. As we approach the holidays, there's still a lot more Z-Prime content out there. Tomorrow and on Thursday, we have the We3 event. That's our event focused on the water energy nexus. And if you have not had a chance to register for that, please do so. That is going to be a fascinating event. We've got some fantastic speakers as well coming to that. But if we don't see you until 2021, have a safe and a wonderful holiday season. From all of us here at Z-Prime, big thanks to Chris Holt, our producer. But from all of us here at Z-Prime, thank you so much. Stay safe. Be well.